You are listening to End of Life University Podcast, real talk about life and death. This is episode number 132. Welcome to End of Life University Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Karen Wyatt, hospice physician, author, and educator. In this podcast, I share thoughtful conversations with experts in various fields related to dying and death, and informative teaching sessions on preparing for the end of life by living fully today. Thanks so much for joining me, everyone. Hello. I'm glad you're here with me today for another episode of this podcast. Today, in a few minutes, I'm going to be talking about what it takes to be a great death ed teacher. And if you've been listening recently, you know that one of my points of emphasis for 2018 is on death education. So I've been sharing quite a bit. There was just recently a podcast episode with an interview with Stacie Smith, who teaches a college course, The Psychology of Death and Dying. And then if you listen to the End of Life University interview series, you will have recently heard an interview with Charles Mentken, a high school teacher who last December taught an elective course, Death and the Meaning of Life, for a group of high school students. And I interviewed Charles and 3 of his students. And it was really fascinating to hear their impressions of that class and what they learned from it. And so I'm sharing that content in hopes that I can inspire people to become teachers in their own communities of death education. So I'll get into that a little bit more about who would be a great teacher, and so you can decide if that description fits you or not. But once again, that's just one of my passions that I'm going full steam ahead on this year. And I have available in the show notes for this episode at eoulupodcast.com, episode number 132. I have teaching guidelines for a death and dying class available that you can download for free if you're interested. Some guidelines that just help with ideas for how to structure a class, what type of class you might teach, how to create a syllabus. But in addition to those guidelines, for the month of March, I'm hosting a work group of people who are in the process right now of planning classes that they want to teach. And so the work group is designed so that we can all come together, brainstorm, and help one another create the perfect class for each one of us to teach. We're there to learn from each other because each one of us probably has expertise in different areas that we can share. And also to just be sounding boards for one another, like, wow, I love that idea, it sounds great, or, you know, I tried something like that once before and it didn't work, to just help each other put our courses together, and then also give each other the encouragement and support that we need to actually go out there and put these classes out for our communities. So that is the work group, Death and Dying Class work group, that's meeting in the month of March. It's filled for right now, but I'm planning to do it again. So if you download the guidelines, you'll be on the mailing list and you'll get information in the future about future work groups or classes or whatever comes together, groups that come together around this same topic. So come to eoulupodcast.com and you'll find a link where you can download the guidelines as a way to just get started and look it over. And also, after you listen to this podcast, it might help you decide, am I inspired to want to be a teacher, or maybe teaching doesn't feel like the right thing to me. One more announcement also for 2018. As part of this education initiative as well, I started a reading group, which if you listen, you've heard a lot about before already, but a reading group called A Year of Reading Dangerously. And for 2018, we're reading a different book each month, and I'm hosting a live discussion of the books at the end of each month. And we just finished reading Smoke Gets in Your Eyes by Caitlin Doty and had a wonderful discussion with Caitlin, and lots of participants who called in to listen and ask Caitlin questions, and it was really wonderful. And so for the month of March, we are reading Knocking on Heaven's Door by Katie Butler, and Katie will be joining us also at the end of March for another discussion. So if you're interested in being part of a year of Reading Dangerously, it's not too late to sign up. It's going on for the whole month or the whole year of 2018. You can sign up and join us at any time. And if you happen to be listening to this and it's beyond 2018, you could actually sign up anyway if you wanted to, and you'll be directed to a web page where all the books will be listed, and you could still read the books, and you could actually listen to the discussions that were held about those books if you're interested. So again, come to eolupodcast.com, episode number 132. You'll find links there to sign up for the reading group also if that appeals to you. And as you know, if you're a regular listener, this podcast is sponsored by generous donations made through my page at patreon.com/EOLU. And Patreon is spelled Patreon. For the last year and a half or so, I've had a number of very generous listeners who've been chipping in a little every month to support this podcast and also the End of Life University interview series. And one person asked me, if I donate there, what am I supporting again? Because I want to support the podcast. But in fact, all of my work is kind of related together. I'm a one-woman show, and everything I do myself and put out. I pay for it myself and put out into the world. And so if you donate to that Patreon page, you're supporting all of the work that I do, because the money that I gather in from Patreon goes to pay for the websites that I have to maintain, for the platform where I record interviews, software for editing the interviews and publishing them, also for the email service provider that I have in order to notify people when interviews are available. So all of that infrastructure that I pay for out of my pocket adds up to quite a bit of money each month that I pay just to keep all of this going. So anything that you contribute through Patreon goes to help me pay those expenses. And so if you support me on Patreon, you're actually supporting all of the work that I do. So I just wanted to make sure that that's clear for anyone interested. And I have a new supporter to thank this week, Janelle Barth. I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly, Janelle. It could be Bartha or Barthe, but Janelle, thank you so much, Janelle, for your donation. I'm so, so grateful. And I also want to thank a legacy donor, one of the longest term donors on my Patreon page is Suzanne O'Brien and her organization, Doula Givers. Suzanne provides training for doulas, training in communities for caregivers, for people to learn about the end of life and how to support a loved one who's dying. And so Doula Givers is an amazing organization, and you can learn more about it at doulagivers.com. And I just want to say a huge thank you. Suzanne is actually my leading supporter, has been very, very generous in supporting this podcast and End of Life University. So I wanted to give her a big shout out and a thank you. She's been on board for more than a year now, supporting me, and so I'm very grateful. And so if you're interested in becoming a donor, you can sign up for as little as $1 a month, literally. For that, just that small amount even actually helps and makes a big difference, because when a lot of people chip in just a little, it adds up and makes a difference to me financially, but also emotionally and spiritually, because it's really helpful for me to know that people out there are listening to what I offer and appreciating it. So I've said this before, I work alone, so I have this beautiful little office in it's a sunroom with tons of windows. It's a gorgeous place to work, but I'm all alone here as I create this content and put it out to the world. And sometimes I wonder if anyone is even listening after I spend, 8 to 10 hours a day just creating things to put out there, wondering, does this go anywhere? Does anyone listen? Does anyone care? And it's through the support I get on that Patreon page that I recognize, wow, people care enough that they're willing to chip in their own money to make sure it continues. So again, thanks to everyone who's been contributing over the last year and a half. Suzanne O'Brien, Janelle Barth, my brand new supporter, and everyone else on the list. Thanks again. And you can go to patreon.com/EOLU if you're interested in becoming a supporter yourself. So now I'll move on this solo episode. No interview today, just me talking at you again, which I hope that's okay. But a lot of times I just have so much to say. And if all I do is feature interviews with other people, I sometimes start feeling frustrated, like, but I want to tell you something more. I want to tell you what I'm thinking about, what's on my mind, and what I know about. And so I really needed these solo episodes as just a way for me to share everything that's in my head and in my heart about end-of-life issues. And so I've become much happier since I started doing a lot more of the solo episodes, so I have a chance to share my passion with you. And my plan today is to talk about what it takes to be a great death ed teacher. And again, this is part of my movement for 2018 to really encourage death education, because I think the fastest way that we can make a difference in end-of-life issues here in our society, not just the U.S., but in Western society in general, is to increase education. And you may have heard me in a previous podcast say we need education everywhere, in every arena, for everyone. And so that's the name of my movement, Death Education for Everyone, because we need to talk more about death. We really need to spread factual information wherever we can in our society to different groups of people. And so that means we need a lot more teachers to come out of our existing end-of-life movement, a lot more people to rise up and agree to be teachers, agree to tell others what they've experienced, what they've learned, and to start sharing that with people in their community and people around them. And so, so this talk is just a little bit about the qualities of a great end-of-life teacher. And I'll get into those in a minute, but I wanted to mention, I think that one of the most important steps for you to think about if you're wondering, could I be a teacher? Who would I teach? Who would want to be taught something by me? I think an important step you can take is to think first of all about what are you passionate about, especially regarding end-of-life issues. Where do you find your passion? What do you get really excited when you start talking about? And what do you find yourself reading about and learning about and soaking up information on? Is it green burial? Is it hospice care? Is it spiritual transformation at the end of life? Like, what is it in this arena that you find most exciting? And then so write down your passion, and then also take a look at your experience. What have you experienced around death and dying and grief in your own life? What has life brought to you? And where is your knowledge level? Like, what have you studied? What courses have you taken? What training have you had? What have you learned? So when you put together your knowledge, your life experience, and your passion, you may begin to find an overlap there of a particular area. And so one example I would have for you, if you have experience working in law enforcement, for example, but you also happen to have a passion for death education, and you've had a personal experience with death, you've been a hospice volunteer, you think about how do those those areas all intersect. And a group that could really use some death education is law enforcement. In every one of our societies, law enforcement officers many times are the first people on the scene after a death, an accidental death or a murder or a suicide. They're often the first people to arrive on the scene and the first people to deal with the death itself. And they could really use a broad death education to help them understand, first of all, how they might interact better with family members or other people in the area when a death has occurred, and how to process their own grief and their own trauma over dealing with death, how they might practices they might need to help them talk about it, journal about it, and to just help them have a frame of reference about death and dying. So that's the example I wanted to give you of how you bring together your life experience, your knowledge and training and education and work experience as well, and your passion, and find where those intersect to think creatively about what group of people could benefit the most from your teaching. What group of people out there do you identify with really well, and you know what their struggles are, you know what their questions are and their issues. And maybe right now you don't have all of the knowledge about death and dying that you need to be a teacher, but once you know who you'd like to teach, if you know that group well and you know what their questions are and what their needs are, that will tell you what to focus on. What additional education? Do you need some education in grief and bereavement? Do you need to learn more about green burial or planning a funeral or writing an obituary? And so you can begin to put together the pieces, and if you don't have the training and education you need, you can figure out where do you need to go to get the information you need to utilize in order to teach the people you want to reach out to. And so here's something that happens in medicine, but I think probably in every profession or career area, doctors receive training and education best from other doctors, and partly because they know when another doctor is teaching them something, that doctor understands the work they do, the training they've been through, the experiences they've had, the burdens that they carry. That person teaching them knows them very well and fully understands their needs. Doctors don't respond as well when someone in a completely different profession comes in and tries to teach them like how they might do a better job in their work, because they feel like you don't even know what I do. You have no idea. So I think that could be true in every profession. And my example of a law enforcement officer, it would be very hard for me as a doctor to go up to my local sheriff's office and say, I'd love to train your deputies in death and dying, when I don't know what it's like to be a deputy. I don't know what it's like to do the work they do. And I could imagine it, but I don't have the experience in their area to really connect and relate to them on that deep level of, I get it. I know how you feel. I know what you do every day. I know what you go through. Therefore, I can help you get answers for the questions that you have. So if you see what I mean, that's why this area of your personal experience, your personal education, knowledge, your training, your work experience, all of those come together to help you find the area where you would make the best teacher and the people who are the best fit for you as students. So we'll talk a little bit about the qualities that make a really great teacher, because you can think about yourself, do I fit? Do I have some of these qualities, or do I need, maybe I can develop some of these qualities? And the first thing I already mentioned is just having a passion for the subject. If you think back to any teacher, your favorite teachers at different points in your life, through elementary school, middle school or junior high, high school, college, if you went to college, your very favorite teachers most likely were teachers who were completely, totally passionate about the subject they were teaching, who were excited every day to bring you this information because it had changed their lives in some way, because it was important to them and meant something to them, and it also made them just come alive. So I encourage you to think about what you are passionate about and what affects you in that way. What is it that makes you come alive when you start talking about it? Because that might be the best area for you to teach. In addition, though, to knowing what your passion is, you do need to be flexible, because as a teacher, you, of course, will be relating to students, and so you need to be able to be flexible to flow with the needs of the students, with their concerns and what they're hoping to learn, so that you can incorporate their interests as well and create a class that blends well with your students. Plus, you need to be able to respond in the moment and adapt to things going on around you in the classroom. So I think flexibility is really important. Also, this being able to pay attention to what's going on in the world. And for example, here in the U.S., we recently, last month, had another horrific school shooting. But I think if you were teaching a death and dying class at the time of that shooting, that's a prime opportunity maybe to throw out your lesson plan for the day and sit down and have a real conversation with students about what that meant, about the trauma of multiple deaths happening in such a situation. So that flexibility in the moment to respond to the needs of your students, respond to what's happening in the world around you. And if you listen to Stacie Smith's interview that I did with her about her class, she mentioned that there was a death in the community. She's one of the people in the kind of the trauma response team who needed to respond to that particular death. And so she actually had to leave her class, and and someone else was stepping in to teach for her. But that was a real moment in which she was able to process with them her own feelings. And on another time, a friend of hers, of her husband's, actually died during the class, and she was able to discuss like her own grief and the process she was going through in dealing with that death, and she was able to be very open with her class and share that. Those were probably the most powerful teaching moments that any of those students had ever experienced, because they were real and authentic. They were coming from Stacie's lived experience, what she was going through at that very moment while she was teaching the class. So when I say flexibility, that's what I mean. Be in the moment and able to shift things and adjust depending on what's happening in your world and the world around you. Following from that, the next quality that I think a good teacher should have is creativity, because I think particularly nowadays, students in general, even older students, are being entertained constantly. We're constantly finding entertainment through the internet and social media. And so I think our students are likely to have shorter attention spans, but also to have fairly high standards for what excites them and entertains them. So I think you need to be really creative in your thinking of how to put together a lesson plan and how to choose activities that will inspire the students in your class, knowing that they're a little bit jaded perhaps because they live in kind of a state of constant entertainment and information all day long, right on their phones. And so you're going to need some creativity to come up with ideas. Where could you go on field trips? What could you do as an activity together? What can you assign rather than just writing a paper? In order to keep your students excited and interested in learning and inspired as well in the subject matter. So creativity is important, and I think some of that will be, along with flexibility, it'll be being able to listen to your own gut, your own inner guidance, because you may make a lesson plan, but you may find in the moment that something else has come up that you really want to incorporate and include. And it may take your creativity to figure out, how do I work this in right now? How do I make this happen? And so the less attached you are to your lesson plan, the more you're able to utilize your creativity and think of ways to put this together. And maybe you move something from one lesson into another lesson to make space for something new. And I think that creativity is a great quality to have. Creativity probably develops the more you teach, the more you've done it. And so even Stacie mentioned that the first couple of semesters she taught her class, she used a textbook and she followed the chapters in the textbook in order to teach her class, because she was nervous. She was afraid that she wouldn't be able to come up with enough material on her own. But once she had some confidence in her own teaching, and she also started identifying lots and lots of potential guest speakers in the community that she could invite in, she found she didn't need a textbook anymore, and her classes got much more creative, much more fun, and much more exciting for her students when they weren't just reading out of a book and coming in and discussing that in class. And so, for all of us right now, nowadays, who are starting to teach, we might have to be kind of take off in our first class fairly creative. Our students may not adapt very well to a textbook, but it might be that we utilize a textbook for ourselves to help create the lesson plan, and don't have our students purchasing that book and reading it every day for the course. So maybe instead we'll have them read a novel or read another fascinating book that they might really enjoy reading, but not reading a standard textbook about death and dying. So the next quality that I think makes a great teacher is curiosity. And the more that you yourself are able to continue to be a student and explore things that you don't know about, I think the better teacher you will be, because you may just be one step ahead of your students in learning, but that's all you need to be, is one step ahead, and everything you're willing to learn and take in is going to inform the teaching you do and going to inspire your students. So the more you have curiosity and you're looking for new things and searching for new information, the more your class will stay fresh and vibrant and exciting for your students, because in the moment you're going to be bringing in something new that you just heard, that you just read, that you just learned, and you'll be just creating this living classroom through your own life and your own experience, and blending that in with what you're teaching to your students. So I think that quality of always staying curious helps you remain a great teacher and an exciting teacher that people want to learn from, because your course will be different every single semester that you teach it, because you will constantly be learning something new that you'll be bringing in and incorporating and modifying your class with. So curiosity, I can't emphasize that too much. It's a really important quality to have all through life, because it helps you face life with less fear if you cultivate your own curiosity, because suddenly you don't dread anything that might happen. You can look at anything like, what if I get sick? What if this happens? What if my house burns down? You can approach anything in life that might happen to you with an attitude of curiosity, like, wow, I wonder what that's like. I can learn from anything. I can learn from whatever happens. And when you bring that attitude into teaching, you can not only, you can give a little bit of that trait to your students by demonstrating your own curiosity and your own approach to the subject matter that you're teaching. You can actually transmit a little of that quality of being curious rather than being fearful and in dread of what can happen. And it will just make you a much richer and deeper teacher who is constantly growing along with the students side by side. Plus, I think it prevents burnout. I think you don't get tired of what you're teaching if you stay constantly curious and constantly learning yourself. And the fifth trait of a great teacher that I wanted to mention for a death and dying class is open-mindedness. And again, I can't emphasize this too much as well. I think it's really important as a teacher to understand that your role is not to lead students to a particular destination, to a particular conclusion. That you really have to let go of, and I mean, I think a lot of us, especially in the end of life arena, we desire so much for people to really get comfortable with death, to face their own fears, to have factual information, to fill out their advance directives, to plan their funerals in advance. We kind of know what we think would help people have a better death. And we know what we wish they would do as a follow-up after our class, but I think we have to be able to let go of those attachments of ours to the outcome we would like to see for our students, because we're really there to expose our students to information, to help them navigate something that might be new and a little scary for them, but not try to control the process for them. Allow them to learn whatever they can learn. Allow them to shift however much they're able to shift and grow however much they're able to grow, without trying too hard to pull or push them in one direction. I also think I mentioned if you have a passion, it's really important to follow your passion, but you have to be careful that following your passion doesn't mean that you have a private agenda for teaching. And so if you have a really strong feeling about a particular subject, let's say death with dignity laws, I think it's important for you to leave your agenda at the door, and you might feel it within you, like I need to teach, I need to tell everyone this subject. If you do have an agenda and the only thing you care about is convincing people that your agenda is right, you might be a better speaker than a teacher, because maybe you can find venues where you can speak and talk about that subject from your own perspective and honor the agenda that you have. But when you are a teacher of a class and you're trying to really help educate people, your main objective is to provide factual information and allow students to digest it and take it in and do whatever they will with it, whether they agree with you or not, whether they come on board with your point of view and your perspective or not. To be the best teacher, you need to be able to set all of that aside and to enjoy the fact that students find their own way and their own direction through what they're learning, that you're giving them information, you're planting seeds, you're giving them information, you're nurturing them to help them grow, but they're going to grow in their own way. And when you can cherish that and cherish the fact that, hey, half your class might end up kind of disagreeing with one of your opinions about something, and that's beautiful when that happens. That's amazing when you inspire students so much that they actually develop their own opinions and have their own ideas and mindsets about issues that you bring up in class, and also that they know enough to disagree with you and to have a back and forth discussion with you. That's incredible. You've done a great service to those students by inspiring them to learn and to formulate their own opinions and their own ideas. So I think you really do have to be at a place in order to be the best teacher where you may have your agendas and your passions, and you may know what you think is the right thing and the best thing for other people to do. And you may be correct in the big picture about everything that you think, but you do have to let that go enough and let go of your attachment to convincing people to see it the way you see it, and be in that space of open-mindedness where you can allow other people to formulate their own opinions. And you offer them all the factual information from all perspectives so that they get their own chance to judge for themselves what they think is right or wrong, what fits them or doesn't fit them, and let them grow in their own way. So that open-mindedness, I think, ends up, I can think back to plenty of teachers I had that stood up for their principles, and they taught us what their principles were, but they didn't impose those principles on us as students. They inspired us to think about, what are your principles? What motivates you? What do you think is right? And that became the subject sometimes for great papers. So what I'm saying, I'm not saying be a bland teacher who never takes a stand or never has an opinion. I'm not saying that. I think it's great to represent your point of view and your passion, as I mentioned before, and to offer that to students, like, this is what I've concluded and what I think, but you need to make up your own mind. You need to get the information, and here's what it is. There's lots of information, and many people think differently. So I think if you can bring in different sides of issues for your students to look at, but you model for them what it's like to take a stand and what it's like to have principles about certain things. You model that, how to have your own values and beliefs and passions, and how to stand up for them without forcing them on the students and without expecting the students to follow you in your beliefs. I think that is the ideal teacher, helping your students grow and nurturing them as they make up their own minds and figure things out for themselves. In our society today, because we're really a society of individualism now, and we have kind of evolved to a place where it's more important for each one of us to develop ourselves, to develop our own ideas, our own passion, our own souls, our own hearts, whatever we're meant to learn and know and grow and understand. I think we do have to honor that individualism in the classroom in order to be teachers. And so the more that we're able to have respect for others who are different from us, who think differently, who've had different experiences, then I think also the better that we can be as teachers. So those are just some ideas I wanted to share. I mentioned the quality having passion for your subject, and balancing that with your experience and your knowledge and seeing where they come together. Also being able to be flexible in the classroom and with your lesson plan, and being creative about the ideas you come up with for activities and discussions, and field trips and all kinds of things that you do in the classroom. Staying curious so that you yourself are always a student, always learning, always finding out new things, and that will keep your class lively and vibrant and keep you excited as a teacher as well. And then lastly, the quality of open-mindedness, and I would say being non-judgmental and being respectful of others goes along with open-mindedness, are the qualities that really make a great teacher for end-of-life issues. So those are the personal qualities to look at for yourself. But I also mentioned earlier, it's important to look at, do you have a passion for the idea of teaching and sharing what you know for other people? Does that excite you? Does that feel like something that you're meant to do? Does it feel like there are things that I know and it's so important to share them? Then I think you should take a serious look at, could I be a teacher and who might I teach? And as I mentioned before, I think it is helpful to figure out who your ideal students are, who would best resonate with what you have to teach, who most needs to learn what you have to teach in your life. Even if you have experience working in the corporate world in business, I think there's a ripe field there in that world for teaching about death and dying, particularly teaching about grief, because I think our workplaces right now are not very receptive to people who are grieving, who they may get 2 or 3 days of bereavement leave from work and come back to work, and no one in the workplace knows how to deal with it, how to talk to that person. So if you've been in the corporate world and you know how to talk to people in that realm, you might be a perfect teacher to approach a company or a big business and say, I could come in and do some staff training on grief and how to manage grief for your employees. And once again, if you feel like, oh, I don't know if I know all of the aspects of grief, well, then you can get some more training for yourself to be that teacher, if you do need that. So again, just another example of thinking about where in life do you have experience, what group do you resonate well with, that you have a feel for those people in that particular situation and could connect with them and bring them your knowledge of death and dying, any aspect of death and dying, whatever that is. So again, it takes creativity to figure out who are the right people for me to teach and what should I be teaching them. But my goal really is to inspire more people to see themselves as teachers. And honestly, you can teach wherever you are. I've mentioned this in one of my earlier podcasts. You might belong to a bridge club, and one of your bridge club members might have lost a spouse, and you might be the person who says, I read this book the other day. Here's what I'm learning right now. This is what I'm studying, and you might be able to share information that changes the lives of those people in your bridge club. It might be your church. It might be Rotary, it might be some other your other place of work where you bring in the information that you're having. And so I have mentioned this before, to see yourself as a teacher, whether you actually have a standard classroom or not. Maybe you're a teacher at the grocery store because you run into an old friend who recently went through a death experience and needs to talk, and you become a teacher for your friend by sharing something that you've learned or something that you yourself have been through. So your classroom might be anywhere, and maybe your students come to you one at a time. But if you have learned about death and dying, and it's important to you and passionate, and it's changed your life, and you feel that you would like to offer something of what you know to others, I really encourage you to think it over and begin to view yourself as a teacher and think about how you might go out in your world around you, whether you have a master's degree and you decide to apply at your community college to teach a course there, or whether you offer to help someone in your church complete their advanced directives. You're still being a teacher in any of those scenarios and everything you can think of in between. So I'll remind you again that if you're interested, you can get the teaching guidelines for a death and dying class at eolupodcast.com. and download those to start kind of brainstorming and thinking about teaching a class. And once you're on that list, I'll be letting you know if there are other work groups or group discussions that I'm doing around teaching. So you might want to get your hands on the guidelines and get your name on that list if you think you'd like to be a teacher at some point down the road. Meanwhile, I want to thank you so much for joining me today and listening to me go on. And I'll remind you there's a new episode every Monday, so just tune in every week, and I'll be bringing you something new every single week. And also go to patreon.com/EOLU if you'd like to become a donor for this podcast. And until next week when we're together again, I'll remind you to face your fear, be ready for whatever life brings you, and love your life. Love every moment of it. I'll see you next week. Goodbye.